Hello everyone and welcome to another glorious day in paradise. Yes. Paradise. Glorious, isn't it? And so today I bring you a build. This build is really freaking absurd for no good reason. So I am using the monolith. This is basically required. I'm using 1,000 cuts on it. You can use whatever the fuck you want, but I like 1,000 cuts on it. I'm using the crystal staff because it's nice. And I'm using overdrive on it for the extra crit chance and crit damage. I'm using the Enigma because it's yet another elemental weapon, and I forgot to change the secondary mod on the mutator on that. Don't pay attention to that. Hold on. All right, now that that's dealt with, and no one totally saw that. As you can see, I'm wearing just the helmet, the technician set, and of course the tranquil heart because I'm a hack. I use the same thing I like. Skill damage, elemental damage, skill cooldown. Pretty important. There is no skill crit chance, sadly, which there should be, or skill crit damage, which there should be. Same with mod skill chance or mod crit chance and mod crit damage for relic fragments. I don't know why those don't exist. But of course, we are using the invoker. I'm using Way of Kalua. I like Way of Kalua for this build, but you can easily make an excuse for Way of Ledusa. And of course, I'm using the engineer. Why the engineer with the invoker? Because this build is actually more of a skill-based build. So of course, you double your skill charges, and you increase your skill damage and elemental by 30% and elemental damage by 15%. And of course, your skill and elemental crit chances by 5%. So since this is skill and it's elemental, it's technically 10%. I'm using the flamethrower because it's also considered elemental. Therefore, it's an extra 5% on top of the 5% for the skill chance, plus the extra damage for being elemental. And that's what I just like using. You could technically use any of the weapons, but in my opinion, the flamethrower is the best for several reasons. Other than that, you also got Communion, which, while your Invoker skill is active, it will help reduce your other cooldowns, which will be very nice. And of course, Mind and Body is just nice to have. For the Engineer, you also got Magnetic Field for extra damage reduction while in range of a heavy weapon. We don't really care about heavy mobility unless you want to go for biggest bonkest damage and hit for 7 trucks using the impact cannon. And of course, we are using the Burden of the Gambler because, yeah, crit chance and crit damage by a good amount. It disables weak points, which does hamper its potential damage, but here we are with Token of Favor for extra 5% damage and 10% crit chance against exposed targets, mostly benefiting off of Monolith here. An extra 10% flat crit chance because they buffed this from whatever the fuck it was before to this, which is nice. And we're using Excess Coil, because using the skill will grant you shield. Can't go wrong with a little bit of shield, and there's a reason why we're using this. See, most people would probably just buff crit damage, but I suggest just buffing your goddamn damage, because your crits are based off your base damage anyways. So, since you'll be using your skills a lot, you'll be getting Excess Coil to proc to give you a bit more defense, but most importantly, Difference Engine will be active while you have a shield active, which will give you a lot of lifesteal and a lot of damage. Of course, for the traits, we're running Flashcaster because you want to cast fast. Fortify because that's nice to have, and it's also installed in this class anyways. Extra skill duration, basically required as far as I'm concerned. Health, basically required as far as I'm concerned. Mod generation, Nice to have. I wouldn't say it's necessarily required. Expertise, basically required. Amplitude, I would also say this is basically required. A little bit of extra damage reduction. Don't need it, but if you want it, there it is. Chakra, mod duration. I wouldn't necessarily say this is basically required, but it's really useful to have to keep your sandstorm from the monolith up, to keep the enemy exposed longer. And of course, we're running Siphoner for extra life steal efficacy. Which is funny because it has the same text as this, but they mean different things. Leech, which also gives you 50% extra lifesteal efficacy. Okay, the difference between these two is this is how much lifesteal your damage is, and this is the effectiveness of all your lifesteal effects. And of course, since we're running both the Siphoner trait and the difference engine, we're going to have a good amount of lifesteal. And even though the Enigma is minus 10% crit chance, it's also one of the only ranged elemental weapons in the secondary class that actually can crit. So of course we expose the enemy, and as you can see, we are actually critting a decent amount with the weapon that just apparently has a shit base crit rate. Drop a shield out. Forget to reload your gun, and you're doing some pretty decent damage overall. Now I know what you're thinking. This lightning's not doing much damage, and that's because you may not know exactly how the lightning works. So I'm probably gonna have to stand way back here because the lightning reaches hella far for no good reason. Maybe not that far. Well, while I'm here, I can show you a trick that you can do. And of course, since I'm pulling out my gun and dropping it, still counts as a skill usage. And of course, since we are running Invoker main class, it reduces all your skill cooldowns by 10% for activating. So let's get a little closer in range. Drop the lightning. Hopefully, it can actually hit something. Yeah. So what this skill does is it does more damage the less enemies there are. This is more good for single targets, better in boss fights, I would probably say. But otherwise, you would probably want to use Way of Ragusa because it's decent AoE, good damage, but more importantly, Brittle for extra 10% crit chance of crit damage. Either is quite viable, I would say. And of course, because I am a funny person, I will be naming this build the Stormtrooper. Which is accurate for several reasons, because one, Stormtroopers can't hit shit, so it's fitting that you can't hit weak points at all. And two is because you're conjuring storms, whether it be with Lightning Storm or Sandstorm. Now I'm clearing the actual Darude over here. And another reason for engineers, you get a huge amount of skill damage. 50% extra skill damage by the engineer class existing, which is absurd. 25% extra range damage, which is nice, and of course 5% skill and range crit chance. So that means you just got more crit chance on your crit chance, which is very nice. And so here in a second, I'll show you how it works against Apocalypse. And I will be using the Lightning, because it is my preferred skill out of the two. So I'll see you here in a little bit, and I'll get to the fight. Also, I forgot to mention, with amplitude, 45 meters.